All right, this is a weird passage breakdown because we're looking at three verses, and this is all going on for Advent, by the way. So, for you West Siders, this is for connection with our sermon series and our life group handouts. And if you ever watch these and you're not from West Side, sorry, this is going to seem weird. Probably maybe worth watching anyway. And what we're going to look at, what we're doing here this Advent season, is to look at pictures of Jesus in the Old Testament. And what we see with these Old Testament pictures of Jesus is that, marvelous though they are always incomplete and anticipating something beyond, something ahead. And so on this week of Advent, we're looking at joy. And so we are looking particularly joy in the presence of God. And that is where we are going to focus our passage breakdown this week, is in that idea. And so for this, the picture of Jesus in the Old Testament that we're going to look at is the tabernacle. And so what I've brought together is just three passages that kind of paint this picture for us, help us to see the dots and connect them, and hopefully give us a little bit more appreciation for Jesus coming to us. And so we're going to begin with Exodus 25, verse 8. This is happening as Moses is receiving the law from God on Mount Sinai. And in the middle of that receiving of the law, God gives this particular instruction. He says, "Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them." Now, the sanctuary here that we're talking about is the tabernacle. It's a tent, a large tent made with all of these very specific things, each of them looking ahead. And if you ever want to study the Garden of Eden to the tabernacle to the new heavens, new earth that we see in Revelation, there are just all of these overlapping pictures that tell the story of the gospel in beautiful, beautiful ways. But anyways, what we're looking at here is God covenanting himself with the people of Israel. And he promises to be their God. You have to remember that they've been in Egypt for hundreds of years and probably no sort of tabernacle, no sort of temple to Yahweh at all. This is a big deal for their God to have a dwelling place, a sanctuary, then have them make a sanctuary, a tabernacle for me. And God promises, I will dwell among them, right? Now we have, and literally, by the way, that this would look is that the tabernacle was in the middle of the tribes of Israel, and they were all arrayed around this tabernacle according to their tribes, according to their camps. And so literally God was dwelling among them in a really powerful and present and tangible way. But then the question becomes, what do you do with this? What do we do once there's a tabernacle? Like, how do you hang out with God? How do you dwell with God? Right? That's the question that immediately this kind of surfaces. Well, much later in the law, Leviticus 7, we're going to look at a particular offering, and this is just one of many examples of how you could dwell with God. In Leviticus 7, what we're looking at is a fellowship offering. And this is totally a gift of the will. It's not a required gift. It's just if you want to hang out with God, if you want to go to his sanctuary, if you want to dwell with him, this is what you do. Leviticus 7, 14 through 15. In the verses before this, they've already brought all these different kinds of bread. There are multiple kinds of bread. Some of it's that flat bread that you see without yeast. Some of it's bread with yeast, which is nice because, let's be honest, bread with yeast is just funner to eat. So they bring all of these. And when it says they are to bring each one of each as a kind of offering, this, if you're looking at it, one of each, you should be asking, okay, what is that a reference to? And the answer is different breads. Some of the regular ones that you would see in the offerings, but also some different ones that are just funner to eat that you would, maybe want to have if you're having a meal. They are to bring each one as a kind of offering, a contribution to the Lord, right? So this is kind of one way to think about an offering. You're giving something to God. And this, by the way, when we say it's to the Lord, notice here that it belongs to the priest. Which priest? The priest who splashes the blood of the fellowship offering against the altar. So as they give things to the Lord, notice that there's a connection to it belonging to the priest. Now, that is not saying that the priest is God at all, but the priest did live off of a portion of the sacrifices that were being brought. And so that's what's happening here. Now, this next part is the priest who splashes the blood of the fellowship offering against the altar. What this means is they would bring an animal to be sacrificed for this. So they bring the animal, they slaughter the animal, the priest splashes blood of the animal against the altar. Now look at this. The meat of their fellowship offering of thanksgiving must be eaten on the day it is offered. They must leave none of it until morning. So what you do is you come to the temple and you bring some bread and you bring an animal and you take the meat back home with you. Or you could eat it, right there. And if it was a full-on temple, you maybe the temple courts or just outside. But you could have a picnic, you could bring all your food, you could come back home. But the idea is that the meat of the fellowship offering is not burned up. It's not only given to God. It actually must be eaten. Here's the command. It must be eaten on the day it is offered. The command is go home and feast. Bring this all to the Lord and then feast. Eat it all, which would mean that you're bringing in your friends to come here to the temple, to the tabernacle. You're bringing your family to the tabernacle. You're doing this offering, and it's a way for just your family and your friends to come together and to feast with and fellowship with God. This is about delighting in the presence of God, enjoying the God who dwells among us. And it's not something you have to do, it's something that you can do. This is joy for the Old Testament people. And notice this last little part, they must leave none of it till the morning. We might wonder why that is. Why were they not allowed to leave any of it to the morning? And the idea is quite simple. Hey, you're giving this to the Lord. Don't let any of it spoil. Don't let any of it rot. Make sure that it gets eaten. It's not a command of gluttony, right? Just bring enough people to finish this meal and just enjoy it. Don't let anything you're offering to God spoil. Okay, so if we're looking at these two texts together as a picture of fellowship, as a picture of enjoying and experiencing the goodness of the presence of God, what do we immediately notice? This is awesome. You can eat a meal with God. And then at the same time, we feel the incompleteness of it. There's an animal that has to die. You've got to go to the tabernacle. You leave the tabernacle and you eat the meal. So it's kind of with God, but kind of not with God. And so there's this picture in the Old Testament of a place where God can be with man, where they can eat together, where they can enjoy each other's presence. But still there is so much separation. Still, there's so much separation. So it's a big step forward, but it's not what we truly want, right? And that's why John 1 is so interesting, because it appears that John, as he writes this gospel, is trying to show us that this tabernacle up here, this sanctuary, and God dwelling among them, was never the fullness of the plan, was never the fullness of the picture. Instead, and this is the way that he opens his gospel, the Word became flesh. Now, this is an allusion back to the very beginning, right? John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? So the Word, right, is clearly Jesus, if we're going back up to John 1. So Jesus, God the Son, became, sorry, I should not say Jesus here. Let me correct that. I'm going to say God the Son. God the Son became flesh, right? And that's when he gets the name Jesus. And when this happens, John's choice of words is not by accident. Made his dwelling among us. This is literally, this word dwell could also be translated pitched his tent. It's not so much the idea of like, I don't know, building like a permanent home, but like you set up a tent, right? It's to make camp almost among us. So there is a direct link between this dwelling among us and what God did among the Israelites in the Old Testament. There's an allusion here to the point where we could say that Jesus is tabernacling among us. That the Word has tabernacled here among us. And so everything that this picture of the tabernacle looked ahead to, Jesus is now fulfilling. But where there was separation in the tabernacle, we don't have that. We have seen his glory. The glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. So the joy of seeing and experiencing fellowshipping with the glory of God is ours because Jesus comes and makes his dwelling among us. This is huge. This is a wonderful piece of good news. And what do we see throughout Jesus's earthly ministry? We see him sitting down and eating, fellowshipping. And there's no sacrifices, there's no priests. It's just people shoulder to shoulder with the Word become flesh, with God the Son tabernacling among us. This is part of what makes Christmas such a joyful time, is that the presence of Christ is ours in a whole new way. And by the way, you're thinking, man, I'm looking forward to that day where I get to fellowship with Jesus again, and me too. I want to rub shoulders with him. But let's also not forget Revelation, where Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock, and whoever opens the door, I will come in, and I will sit with them, I will eat with them. We're going to share a table together. The fellowship of God, the fellowship and joy that we can have with Jesus Christ is now a inward, spiritual reality. Reality. Not an imagined thing, not an imaginary thing. It is real, right? And one day we'll do it in a physical way, right? So spiritual versus physical, but it's just as real, just as actual, just as true. So one of the reasons that we should be excited about Christmas on Christmas morning is this is the day that we celebrate the fullness of the tabernacle, the fullness of the presence of God, the joy we get to have in his presence. And you should think about this whenever you sit down to eat, that every meal you have can be a fellowship meal with God. And here's the best part. You don't even need food to do that. You can just do that in your spirit, in your soul, in your inner being, right here, right now with Jesus. And again, that is part of why Christmas is so amazing. So this is just a picture of Jesus in the Old Testament, a cool connection point between Exodus 25, John 1:14, with Leviticus just being an example of what that looks like in the in-between, and then Revelation being kind of the fullness of that right here, right now.